Hey, there we go. Cool. So I would like to review some fetch and promise stuff. I think I'm just gonna do something from scratch and kind of talk through it, and we can ask questions as we go along. And if there's anything that I'm not talking about that you would like to talk about, feel free to holler and we will shift it. So yeah, I'm going to go through and show what it looks like when I start a little project here, just so you can get a sense of what it might look like when you're not just cloning something down from from Canvas. So to do that, I'm going to share my screen if I can. Yeah, share screen. Great. And let's just share the desktop. Fantastic. That's a me. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go to my terminal here. I'm going to close all little things that Zoom opens for me. Awesome. High floating meeting controls. Perfect. Cool. So I'm in my repo directory. I'm just going to create a new directory for myself here. So I'm going to make a directory. Um, and what's it going to be? It's going to be tarot cards, I think. Test. Cool. So let's see. I'm just going to open this up in code so I can get a better look at it. I should take a moment. It's been taking longer lately, and I don't know why. It's disturbing. Usually comes up instantly. There we go. A code. Boom. Awesome. So great. So nothing here right now. First thing I'm gonna do is make a quick sample HTML file just so we can see what that looks like. I'm just gonna pop that over there. Boom. Emmet is default with VS Code now, I think. It has all sorts of great shortcuts. So you can literally like open up a HTML file and hit exclamation point and it'll give you a little skeleton there, which is nice. Speaking of skeleton, first thing I like to do is pop a little CSS library in there called skeleton. It's at get skeleton. Yeah, perfect. It lets you make websites that look like this very easily. It's not super, elaborate or anything, but it makes it easy to make it look nice for starters.
Question. Can I ask you a question actually?
Yeah,
Do you
absolutely.
recommend something like this over like Bootstrap by any chance?
I usually start with this, partly because I'm familiar with it, partly because it's super lightweight. People like Bootstrap, Material UI, Semantic, Tailwind, which I don't recommend. But it really depends. I do this when I'm starting something from scratch that I don't really have an idea of what it's going to look like necessarily yet. It's good for sketching stuff out. And let me actually grab the file from the CDN so I can show you. I can grab, where is it here? There we go. The file itself is not super long. I'll just grab the full one here. Copy link tag, copy URL. That's one. So we can even just look at the CSS, and it is not that much CSS. Bootstrap is a lot more CSS,
Yeah, doesn't
much
it
more
like
fully featured.
slow down? I
Yeah.
hear that depending on how much you use it, it like slows down the web page that you're creating, the web application.
Yeah, I mean, it's relative. I mean, the efficiency is job 3, right?
Mm.
If we were that worried about it, we would not be using JavaScript. We would probably be doing something else. But it is a lot bigger and it is a lot slower. Probably not enough for an average person to notice at all. So,
Sorry, side tangent. So
no,
we
no,
can.
no, it's a great question. My recommendation would be to use something that you're interested in learning or something that you are familiar with and comfortable with, or something that lets you do what you want to do easily. This is super lightweight and is basically just styling. Bootstrap and Semantic and Material have a lot of support for forms and UI elements and panels and tabs and all sorts of stuff. So if you have an idea that you want to do stuff like that already, great. Those are probably a better bet for y'all. But probably close out Slack for now. And get back to code. I don't need my terminal anymore. We're in here. Cool. So I'm going to throw this CSS in here for me. Link CSS and boom. So now I've got some basic CS in there. I like using. I don't think this is in the curriculum anymore. I have a npm module installed called light server. You can do npm install g light server if you like, or do it through npx. Just say npx light server. And what this does is when you're in a directory that has stuff you want to look at in a browser, you can just say light server, spell it right, and it will open up something in a browser for you, in another browser window, of course. Bring this one over here. Cool. And this will do, so there's nothing in here right now, right? So let's pop over to code here and just to throw a, hey, it's me. And it'll do auto loading for you. So you can change stuff up and it'll reload as you're typing it, which is really nice. I'm actually going to put this in a big container div. Equals, gosh, I haven't done this in a hot minute. Was it, is it container? You came here for HTML, right? Great. So container just gives you a nice little thing there. Awesome. So let's get to work. What I'd like to do is pop open a JSON server with some data, and we're going to look at what it looks like to fetch that. So first off, I'm going to add a JavaScript file. Script. Do this for me. Yeah, script source equals, let's call it just index.js. And I'm going to add a script.js here, or index.js. And the first thing I always like to do is just throw a console log in there. Keyboard cat. And I want to make sure this is deferred, so you don't have to do the whole adding an event listener to the DOM for DOM content loader and all that stuff. And just to make sure, nope, index.js, its MIME type is not executable. Of course, yeah. Let's try that again. Maybe a source. Nope, that's absolutely not what I wanted. Source script. Maybe that, right? What did I do that's super simple that's wrong? Is it too early for me to do JavaScript? Is that the case?
It's the end script tag.
Oh yeah, the end script tag, of course.
Yeah,
It's not a self-closing tag. Thank you. Yeah. That will definitely do it. Let's reload this here. Great. This is why I always put a console log like that at the first time. You get to see someone with 30 years of experience mess up loading a JavaScript file. Feel better about yourself. Cool. So now that I've got the JavaScript file in there and I know that it's actually loading the right file, I can't tell you how many hours of my career I've wasted trying to debug JavaScript and realize I've been editing the wrong file. So make sure you're working the right file. Let's take a look here. I'm going to, I asked my robot friend to give me some data. Put this in the same window. Great. I went to chat GPT and asked it like, hey, give me some tarot card data. And it's going to do that. So this is really great for generating sample data. There's also Faker. There's what's the what is it? Macaru is great. Macaru lets you pick a bunch of fields and stuff, and it generates data for you. All these tools are great. Whatever works for you. I'm going to use this. Hopefully, it is coherent. The danger of using AI to generate stuff is you never know what you're going to get. So I'm going to call it tarot.json. Let's see what it decided to put in there. Format that. Cool. I got a couple of cards. That's fine. Awesome. So this is JSON. This is an array here we've got, and it's going to give us a bunch of pieces of data here. So let's pop open another window down here and run that through JSON server. I've got it installed globally. If you don't, you can use JSX, NPX. And if everything is formatted correctly and everything works, data must be an object, of course. Let's make this an object and call it cards with quotes.
The ChatGPT is apparently at capacity right now. Is there any way that you could like share the text that you're using just so I can follow along with it?
Yeah. Let me
just
paste
chat
that.
or something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I turned it into an object here. I compulsively do Option Shift F in VS Code. So if stuff is, all janky, it auto formats it. I highly recommend doing that with your code because it will also immediately tell you if there's an error in it. Let me post that in the chat if I can. Chat.
And that was Shift Control F to format it?
Option Shift F. Right? Yeah. Option Shift
Okay,
F.
so options, that's going to be a Macintosh. I'll find it.
Yeah, it should be Alt Shift F. I think it'll be
Alt Shift F, probably.
Yeah, on PC. Or you can also set your own hotkey if you want. It's VS Code. You can make it do what you want. So I pasted that data in the chat. And if you're watching this later, I'll make sure to paste it in the video description. Along with, I'll put this code up in a repo so you'll have reference to it as well. But let's see if this works before I start talking big. Great. Here is our link here. I'm going to copy it because it seems like it wants to open up in a new window. Hey, there's my server. So my server is running on localhost 3000. We're getting that data. Servers. So let me do a brief side topic on servers. Like, someone mentioned during stand up that they had a little bit of trouble grasping the whole server HTML request and all that stuff. All the stuff on the nope, that's a lie. All the stuff we're going to be working with here is going to be going over a protocol called HTTP. Protocol is just an agreed way for things to talk with each other or people to talk with each other. An unspoken protocol that we often follow is one person says, "Good morning." The other person replies, "Good morning" back. The other person says, "How are you doing?" And the other person usually says, "Fine, how are you?" They might also actually tell you how they're doing, which is a different protocol. So it's just a regular way of saying how to say things to each other and respond to them. HTTP, hypertext protocol, transfer protocol, is a way for clients and servers to talk to each other. Server is just a program that runs usually, we'll be running stuff in a terminal, but they can also be applications. And they're basically, servers are things that sit and wait for requests, and they respond to those requests. Clients, like our web page, clients can be web pages, applications, apps on a phone. You can use, write a Alexa application, the client for a web server. Servers don't always need to be web servers. Servers can be database servers or chat servers or mail servers or whatever. In our case, we're talking about web servers and web clients that talk over HTTP. The default port is 80. We're running ours on 3000 localhost just means the machine that you're on. So HTTP is a stateless protocol, which means that it doesn't maintain a consistent connection. Every time you make a request, it makes a new connection to the server and says, hey, here's my request, please fulfill it. And it will either be like, cool, here's your response, or nah, you did something wrong, or I did something wrong. And it's a 400 or a 500 error. So the way we're going to make requests here, well, we already just made a request here, right? We made a request to our localhost 3000, and we can see in our terminal down here, these are the requests. So if I clear this out with Command K, if I reload this to make a new request, it's going to, actually the cards, right? It's going to make that request. And down here, it's not showing me the thing that I was just talking about. Oh, because it's not reloaded. If I do a shift reload, is that going to do that for me? Nope. I'm going to restart the server. Don't tell anyone. Oh, because that's the, yeah, that's not the JSON server. I want to look at the JSON server. There we go. So I'm going to reload that. And now we can see we're doing a get to cards. 304 is a flavor of okay, just means it's somewhere else. Here it is. And so we're making a get request to the server. The server is saying, hey, I know how to handle get requests. It says, I'm making a get request for this particular URL. The server's like, great, I got stuff for you at that URL. Here it is. Right now, we're just working with JSON, but we're doing all sorts of requests. We're making requests to the server itself to get the web page. We can do post, patch, delete requests to change the data on the server. Right now, we're just going to talk about gets. So basically, we are saying, hey, server, give me this thing. And the server's like, I would love to, or I don't have that thing, or something broke on my end. And in this case, we're getting stuff. Yeah, so are there any overall questions that you have about how client server stuff works, making requests, that I can sort of dive into a little bit if that will help?
So is that technically an API call, or is this like the most simplified version and it would need to be more complex to be considered an API call?
Great question. This is, yeah, you can consider this an API call. API is, a category of things that's kind of loose. But yeah, basically an API is, this that we're getting here. The API is, so application programming interface. There's a lot of different kinds of APIs. Basically what it is an agreement. It says, here's the API. If you make a request to /cards, if you make a get request to /cards, you will get data that looks like this. And that the API itself is just an agreement that we're going to do that. Then you write a server that fulfills that agreement. You write clients that make requests according to that agreement. And if everyone is following the agreement, it should work. Humans are humans and computers are computers, and sometimes the implementation of an API is different from the definition. So yeah, but this is a very simple API. The API just says, when you make a get request to /cards, I will give you a list of the cards. If you make a request for a certain card ID, which we don't have right here, it will give you that card, right? So yeah, this is a simple API for sure.
Thank you.
But they can be arbitrarily complex as well. Other questions?
I hate to back us up again, but I'm still not able to get this. There's something about my JSON file that's not quite working. It's got a, can I see the top of this, the file? Just, okay. I think I see what's different. Okay. I think
what error are we getting?
It's putting a red line under the first colon after cards and saying that it's expecting a comma, but oftentimes that just has been this, and then the way it looks is that after cards I need a open bracket.
Yeah.
And that's what's causing the
Yeah.
issue. And Now-
Another tool I was going to show this to you earlier, but I'll show it to you now since I didn't. I almost typed JSON. JSON validators. There's plenty of JSON validators online, and you can take your JSON file and paste it in here, and it will say that's valid JSON. If for some reason it's not good, it'll tell you why and where. It'll tell you where it finds the error, not necessarily where to fix the error. But it is definitely useful for finding out what is wrong with your JSON file if there's something wrong.
Okay, JSON. I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, and I just Googled for JSON validator. There's 100 of them. They're all relatively equally good. This also validating your JSON and getting a good response. If your stuff is not working, that tells you it's not the JSON. So you need.
Can I ask real quick?
Yeah,
what
please.
was it again that you used to generate JSON data?
This was the Chat GPT or chatopenai.com. You basically like give it stuff in English and it will write stuff for you. You can the other one that I like to use more for real data. This is the first time I've used this for a demo like this because it would be fun to try out. I like Makaroo.com, where you can give it give it fields, give it the type of things it is, and it will generate data for you, and it'll do it in CSV or Excel format or JSON or XML, whatever you want. So
Thank you.
format in JSON. Boom. There's some data.
Okay.
So it's great for generating fake users or just whatever data you want for your application. Super, super handy. And again, there's a lot of Taker is another one that you can use. But again, just Google like generate data and you'll find a bunch of things. Awesome. These are great. What other questions do we have? Cool. So let's write some code. How about that? Awesome. And I just want to look close to 3000. No, I want the other one. What do I want? Where's my there it is. Nope. I'm gonna start up light server again because I forgot where all my stuff is. 3001. Cool. 3001. Browser sync. Nope, that's not what I want. I'm just gonna restart it again. I don't know what happened there. Light server. Oh, it opened up in a different window. That's why. Okay. Too many. Only have one window open. Let me close all that stuff. Cool. So this is JSON server. Why is it giving us the JSON server instead? Let me start from scratch. Yeah, sometimes things get confused about what port they're running on. Here's the light server. Great. There's our page. Here's our JSON server. Great. That's also running on 3000. That doesn't seem good. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I'm going to tell it to run on a different port if I can. What's the syntax for that? That's a great question. Let's JSON server port. Alternate port. I think it's just dash port. Great. So you can do JSON server port. I'm just going to do 3001 and look at our cards. Awesome. So now our our web server and our JSON server are running on two different ports to avoid confusion. 3001. There's our data. Great. So 3001 is our data. 3000 is our HTML. Now let's write some code. Cool. So here's our index.js. We're good. So before we just start writing code willy-nilly, let's talk about what we want to do. for starters, just to demonstrate the get, I think I would like to fetch the data and display it in a list. I think that's a good start. So first thing we want to do is add a list. And so I'm just going to do a, let's see, let's write this up. List of tarot cards. And here is our list. It's an unordered list and it doesn't have anything in it. I'm going to give it an ID, call it card list. Naming things. I like using IDs. It is a general good practice when you want to interact with your page, your DOM, with JavaScript. Use IDs whenever you can. IDs are unique, and most of the time you're going to be operating on a thing, a list, a form, a div, whatever. You might be generating stuff inside that, but generally your entry point is going to be a thing that is unique. So using IDs, whenever possible, use IDs to interact with HTML or the DOM using JavaScript. I like to use get element ID to sort of enforce that for myself. There are cases where you want to, modify a list or whatever that all has the same class, and you need to like loop through those. Then using a query selector or something is great, or get them by class. In general, my guideline / rule for myself is IDs are for JavaScript, classes are for CSS, and that keeps that nice and delineated, because on a real project, you're probably going to be working with more than just you. And you might be writing JavaScript, someone else might be writing the CSS for styling, and you're not always going to be working together at the same time. So they might, a design requirement might come down the line. They will change the CSS and or classes on a page maybe. And if you're using classes to manipulate your stuff with JavaScript, shit's going to break. So keeping those separate is generally a good idea, if you can. Opinions differ. That's mine. So short version, I'm using an ID called card list. I'm making it all one word. You can make it one word. You can make it in capital case if that's easier for you. I generally lean against using dashes here. Definitely use dashes in classes for the reasons that we've seen. It just makes it a little bit more clunky to reference them sometimes. But if you're just using get element by ID, not so much.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I actually have a question on that, because that came up in a lab the other day where something was labeled in the HTML with an ID that was in dash case, like card list is here.
Yeah.
And then when we tried to call it at a certain point, this was for the list, I think, the list lab. And when we tried to call it at a certain point, the JavaScript was complaining that we were using like the word new, for example, was one of the words in the, and I don't know if it was the word new that caused that or what.
For me, it was description.
Yeah, it's like new description. So,
and you're using
a
that
lot
like
of people had to
target.
go and new description dot target or event target. Yeah.
So if we were, this is giving me all sorts of errors because we're not doing target stuff right now. But right now, if I did card list, that would be fine, because card list is a property on the target. Target is just an object. It would just be just like this. If we have it card list target, what this is telling us in JavaScript, because JavaScript doesn't care about white space so much, this is saying to JavaScript, hey, get the card property off of the target object and subtract list from it.
Okay.
So
that explains what was happening there.
Minus signs. And so this will either give you a error like, card is undefined, or card is not a thing, or list is a variable that doesn't exist or hasn't been defined, or you can't do a minus operation on whatever.
So what would best practice be to work around something like that if it comes up in the future?
Yeah. So if you're working on HTML that you can't change, and there are dashed things like that, what are some other ways to access the properties of an object?
Brackets, right?
Absolutely.
I see.
Um,
Okay.
yeah.
I hadn't thought of that. That's a much more
Yeah.
elegant solution than I added an ID programmatically to
Yeah.
like
A lot of us-
reference a
A
different
lot
ID.
of us changed. A lot of us changed the idea of the actual HTML to bypass that.
Yeah.
Which I don't think that was like the intent of what they were trying to make us do. But
Yeah.
most of us were just frustrated. I was like, you know what? We're just gonna change.
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Get it to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very Kobayashi Maru solution. I've definitely done that in the past. Definitely changed HTML to conform to what I think it should be. But often you don't have that option. Often you're getting HTML from someone else, and they're like, hook your JavaScript up to this HTML.
Okay.
So I think it is better practice if you are in a position where you can change the HTML to work better. But it's also very good to know other ways to do it, especially if oftentimes you'll get data from someone else that has properties that have not letter characters in it, and you have to use brackets. So yeah, making it work is rule one, but knowing how to do it in multiple ways is also a really good way. Cool. That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you for going over it.
Yeah, you bet. That's why I'm here. Any other questions before we roll? Cool. So we've got a card list. So this is our entry point into the DOM. So let's go ahead and let's just grab that element. So I'm going to just call it the same thing as what it's called. This is another advantage of naming them in a way that can be done like that. That you can make your variables match the IDs, which takes a lot of brain work off. I'm just going to do document, get element by ID, and it is card list. Great. And put a punctuation, and just to make sure, like, if I'm just starting out something and I'm not sure what I'm doing, I console log everything all the time. Some people like to use debugger. I'm a console log boy all the way. So just to make sure, before we start playing with it, you can actually log out an element, right? DOM elements are just objects. Objects, it's just regular old plain old JavaScript object. So if I've got this here, Option Command J pops open my console, and look at that. It logs out the card list, and even shows us on the screen where it is. We highlight it there. So also a great debugging tool. If it's saying like, oh, can't append something to undefined or something like that. You can console log out your elements. Elements just an object, and there's different ways to do that. This is one. Cool. So I know I'm grabbing that element, and I can add stuff to it. Let's hook up the fetch. So fetch, super easy. I'm going to, even though this is simple, I'm going to get rid of this because we know that works. I'm going to set up another constant and call it card URL. All caps maybe. And so this is going to be, type it out. Cards URL. I'm a big stickler for naming things properly, because I've burned myself in the past so many times writing some code and then going back 6 months later and just being like, what the fuck was that guy thinking? Naming things, naming constants, variables, naming functions to exactly what they are, so that anyone can look at that and know what it is without having to like read comments or something. Variables are always nouns, either singular or plural, depending on whether it's a string or a number or an array or object. Functions are generally verbs, so you can tell exactly what they're doing just by looking at it without having to read the contents. And that's something as I get to look at your code, I'll probably make comments to that effect. But here we are at fetch. Fetch is a verb. It's doing the thing that we want to do. And so I'm just going to do a cards URL here. And that way, if for some reason the API changes or it's hosted in a different place, we can just change this and not change the 20 places that we use cards URL down here. Cool. What does fetch return? Fetch is just a function. So if I just do this here, and I can even console log out the results of that, right? What does fetch return?
Is it a promise?
It is a promise indeed, yes. And we can verify that by, hey, look at that. Also, when I'm console logging stuff, if it is more than just one line here, I'll often say, cards or fetch. So if I have 20 console logs, which ideally I won't, I'll know, which one this is. Cool. So we did that. I'm probably gonna have to fix that error. Because it's, yeah, right. It's not a port. But this tells us some information about what fetches returns. It's a promise. It is pending right now, and actually the promise state is rejected because I put the wrong URL in there. So let me talk briefly about promises before we fix this up. Like most other things in JavaScript, a promise is just an object. That's all it is. Just like, X equals whatever. It's just an object. A promise is an object that has a few things in it. It has a state. So we see it's rejected here. A promise is just a thing that can be in one of three states. It can be pending, which means it hasn't done the thing you asked it to yet. It can be resolved, which means it did the thing and it's ready to tell you what it got back from it, or it can be rejected. And that just means it couldn't do the thing for some reason. It will always go from pending to either rejected or the other thing I just said, my brain, completed state, and it will never go back up to pending. So it can be in one of three states, and it can't go back. And that's it. And then it has a container for the stuff that it got back or the error that it had. A promise has a couple methods on it. So I can say here, let me write out what a promise might look like. This is not what they actually look like. So I can say, here's my promise. It's an object, and it has a state, and say it's pending right now. Great. There's our promise. That's going to have some data. Oops. let me write this in an actual code editor. So it'll have a state, and I'll say it's pending. Resolved or failed, or what do they call it? Rejected. Different promise libraries have different names for these things. The one that JavaScript uses is resolved or rejected. And it's also going to have some data, right? We don't have any data yet. It's going to be undefined. But when it finishes the thing, it's going to change to whatever the data is. It might not be called this, but just for structure here. It also has some functions associated with it, or methods. A method is just a function that's attached to an object. What kind of methods have we seen on fetch? Or maybe what? So you do you have a promise, you do a dot something. What is that something?
Then
Yeah. So if we have our promise dot then blah blah blah. This is a function. It's just a method, just like you would do array dot sort, my array dot sort. Gosh. That's you are, there we go. Sort, or string dot length or whatever. Console.log. These are methods on these objects. Methods are just functions that are attached to an object. So then is just a function. And we can add it to the object here. Do the thing. Then is a function that takes another function, right? Sorry. Let's look what a fetch function looks like. How about that? So we're doing our fetch, and here's our dot then. So this is going to take a function as a response, and we can see it does that here. So this is a function that takes, we'll call it a callback, right? It's kind of a callback. And so what does dot then do with the function that you passed it? So if I just pass in console log, it's going to log out whatever it gets back. So we can take this and do the we can call back function on this data. Hey, we just wrote a promise. A basic promise. Like that is what a promise object looks like. So basically we're passing in a function here in the dot then method, and all it's going to do is call it back on the data. It does need to, if the state equals resolved, it'll do that because it can't do it if it hasn't finished yet, and it'll throw errors or do other stuff otherwise. And there's some asynchronous code and stuff that makes it work the way it does, but basically, like this is how a promise works. So and since it's just an object, we can pass it around. So we can do const fetch promise, const fetch promise equals control, and then we can console log that out, and that should give us our promise. Yeah, there it is. So since the return value of a fetch is a promise, and a promise is just an object, that means we can assign it to variables. We can throw it in an array. We can pass it to another function. We can return it from a function that has the fetch in it. So just want to kind of demystify, because they seem really kind of like abstract and magical things that just when we say the right words, the magic happens. Which is true to some extent, but also like they are real things that we can actually build ourselves. You can find a promise library and look at the code, and it's relatively simple. Got a lot of error checking and parameters and stuff, but the core stuff is actually pretty simple.
Question?
Yeah.
So I guess my question was going to be this promise that you drew up here with this structure with the resolve state.
Mhm.
Is that I guess innately how that exists when you would try to call a fetch, or would you need to structure it? Would you need to draw it out like this?
Oh,
Like-
yeah. So back in the bad old days, we would have to import promise libraries, and they all work differently. Promises are now built in JavaScript things. So yeah, you don't have to worry about defining them yourself or worrying about this structure at all. If you just know the magic words and use it that way, great. This thing is built into JavaScript already, so you don't need to worry about making that yourself.
Another question, actually.
Fun exercise. Yeah.
So we could assign a variable to the I guess the URL, for lack of a better term, I'm not sure there's, and pass that variable to a fetch. What is a fetch function? Would it be, or what? How would you properly describe that? I'm thinking out loud.
Yeah, let me write a little bit of code
Or
and tell me if I'm
request
doing what you're asking. So if I have like a function that is get cards, and it'll take a URL. Are you saying I could do the fetch in here?
Well, no,
and
because I
maybe-
see you assign the URL, or your local host, I should say. You assign your local host / cards to a variable called cards URL, and then
Mhm.
you pass that variable to the fetch.
Oh yeah, like I'm doing up here.
Yeah. So you could do that as well then,
Yeah, absolutely.
instead of just putting the local host straight into the fetch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so this, if I'm writing an application and, I've gone nuts and done 20 fetches here, and then realized I put the wrong URL up here, that occasionally happens. Then I just change the URL and fetch is going to fetch to the right place in every other place.
Okay.
So
Sounds
does
good.
that
Thank
answer
you.
what you're asking?
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Cool. Other questions? All right. So right now this fetch doesn't work. And this is actually a great opportunity. We have a dot then. What else can we dot off of a fetch? If you've seen that art. There's
Dot
like,
this.
sorry, say that again.
Dot this. I'm just taking a shot in the dark.
Yeah, good guess. This is the way that an object will refer to itself. So we're looking at the methods that are on this. On this, this is such a bad keyword because we use it in English for talking about things. Yeah, so one of the things we want to do to catch errors, we can actually do a dot catch. Catch is a method on the promise, and basically that is that's the method or function that gets called when we go into the rejected state. So I can, and it takes a function. So I can, I'm just gonna pass an error function or arrow function in here, an arrow. I'm just gonna, console error. Here's the error.
So if I understand what you're doing correctly, the catch is basically catching an error, and then if that error occurs, then you get the message, here's an error from the console.error.
Exactly.
Message.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's the error, and I did a console error, so it'll show up in red. You can do console log or whatever you like. Failed to fetch. Great. So this will catch it if there's an error, and that means, and this is a 400 style error, which means like 404 or 40 something, which means that you made a mistake. 400 errors are all some version of, hey, you did the wrong thing. 500 errors, which you can also get back. If there was something wrong with the data, or if the server we wrote doesn't work or something, it's going to give a 500 error. That means we made a mistake. Something's wrong on our end. But this is going to be a not found error, which means that our thing is not the right URL. And that should clear up that error. Fetch promise is not defined. Yeah, of course it isn't. Cool. Get rid of all those errors. Cool. So it's working in a format. Looks great. So let's look at our dot then. So dot then is a method on the promise. Dot then is the counterpart to catch. It takes a function and does the thing with the data it got back if it successed. So console log is a method or a function. So we can just pass that in there. What are we gonna get if we do a console log here? What does a fetch promise have as data when it resolves?
The pending.
Say that again.
Never mind. I don't know if I understand the question.
Is it the JSON string?
Close. Yeah. It will eventually be a JSON string. But what is it before it's a JSON string? Before we turn it into JSON?
Just the object or
Yeah, what kind of object? And this may not have been called out explicitly, so I'll talk about it now. It is a response object. So when we do stuff with HTTP, requests and responses are a big thing. When our request, and the fetch actually creates a request object and sends it to the server, or sends it to the process that makes the HTTP call. And often servers will have, whether it's Node, JavaScript, Ruby, Python, whatever, will generally take a request, HTTP request, and turn it into some sort of request object. When we get a response, we get a response object. And if I'm not lying, hey, there we go. So this is a response object. It has a bunch of data in it, like where it's coming from, what's in it, all that stuff. Hey, look, it's got a body. That is a readable stream, which doesn't do us a lot of good. But we also have a way to turn this response object into JSON. So we can throw a function in here, and this actually has a method on it called JSON, which returns another promise. So, and we can actually look this up. So we had our response object here. Let's go to our favorite MDN response. So there's a response object. It's part of the fetch API, and this is a different API than a different kind of API than a web API. This is an API that describes how an object works in JavaScript. These are all the things that it can do. And we can look, if we didn't know already, we can look, and there is a JSON method. So we can call response JSON on that response object, and that will return a promise that turns the response into JSON. If we get back, and you will definitely see errors that say, like, your JSON is malformed. It starts with a less than sign. That probably means there was some kind of error on the side that threw back HTML, and it tried to parse the HTML as JSON and couldn't. So this promise fails. And it'll throw an error. You can catch it, whatever. And feel free to, in your copious spare time, troll through these, because there's a lot of fun things you can do. But we are primarily concerned with turning it into JSON. So this is basically saying, make a fetch, take the promise that comes back from fetch, run the .then method on that, which basically says, hey, when you resolve, run this function for me, if you don't mind. And since fetch is asynchronous, it's going to do that, and then it's going to get on with it here. So it's going to do the stuff after the fetch before it does anything in the .thens. Asynchronous. There are other ways to do this using the async await keywords. I think those are less clear. Other people prefer them. Opinions are different. Cool. So once we call res.json, res.json returns another promise, which we can then do something with. I'm just going to throw in console log. .then again takes a function. Console log is a function, so it's going to take whatever data is associated with the resolved function here and put it through console log. And ideally, that should throw it to our console. Can someone tell me so these are 3 console logs, 1, 2, 3. What order are those console logs going to happen in?
I have a very rudimentary question that probably seems like, well, anyway,
Yeah.
when you're talking about like res.json and then console.error and console.log, and you're talking about like these as like functions, is basically anything that continues with parentheses, would that be considered a function then? Because that's what I'm getting at as far as like whenever you call something a function, from what I see, is just anything that continues with parentheses and put data inside those parentheses. Is that my understanding, or am I?
In general, no, but in this case, yes, if that makes sense. So dot then again, it's just a dot then is just a function.
Mm.
You know,
Okay, yeah, I understand. I see.
and so dot then takes another function. So you know, fn, that's the function that it takes. This is going to be attached to an object that has some data. We'll just say, you know, our data looks like that. And so function dot then is going to take the function that was passed to it and run it with the data that it has. So, and let me know if I'm understanding your question right.
Actually, no, I just realized that's not the case, because I mean there's also parameters and arguments. If anything that was okay, never mind. I take my question back.
So in this case, the parameters for the then function is another function. And so does that make sense?
It does actually. I just answered my own question in my head. So
awesome, cool. That's the best way. That's why I encourage asking good questions, because half the time when you ask a question, you're like, oh yeah, that's the answer, because I figured it out because I had to ask a question about it. Cool. Does anyone else have any questions along those lines? Cool. Sweet. So oh yeah, so we've got our 3 console logs here, 1, 2, 3. What order are those console logs going to happen in? Anyone can jump in.
Can I say starting with the console log fetch return values? Is that what we're starting off with?
Yep.
Yeah, so that one, and then the after, and then the fetch.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah. And so since fetch is an asynchronous function, everything after it is going to happen before it does anything, even if it took quote no time. I can talk about technicalities of it, but basically it's always going to run the rest of the JavaScript after it before it does anything, no matter how long or short.
Can I just think of an asynchronous function as something that's running in the background while the rest of the code loads?
Kind of, yeah. So there's a thing called an execution stack, and this is stuff you don't need to know about necessarily, but this is how it works. And so basically, it's a bunch of instructions. So when every line you write, it turns it into JavaScript instructions and puts it on the stack there. When you call an asynchronous function like fetch or whatever, it will basically put it at the end of the list. So it's going to do everything else, and then it's going to do that. And basically every tick, if you want to call it that, it's going to check to see if that promise is resolved. So it's kind of running in the background. JavaScript isn't multi-threaded, so it's not exactly, but you can think of it that way. And if you didn't understand all this stuff, totally fine. The answer is yes.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Is it typical in like an index.js file to have more than one like call to fetch, or do you just like chain a lot of thens and you like do all of the kind of functional activity in there? Because I was just thinking about like if you had more than one call to fetch, how would that work with like the call stack?
Yeah. So 2 answers, and they're both yes, I think. Often fetches aren't just going to be sitting out there like this. They're often going to be attached to event listeners. For if you're loading initial values or loading initial data, you'll often have one out like this in this kind of program. But yeah, you'll often have fetches attached to button clicks or form submissions or whatever else. And those will be different kinds of fetches. But yeah, if you are just doing this too, and like, oh, I want to get the cards, and I also, maybe I have a user logged in, so I can also do fetch, user URL or whatever, and do all the stuff after it. So these are just two JavaScript instructions. The first one's going to create a promise with this URL, with this stuff doing. That's great. That has these things it can do after the .then resolves, and then we can create 100 of them if we want, for sure. Yeah. So basically, a fetch is just, hey, put this on your to-do list, computer. So you can do as many of those as you want. If they're fetches, each one's making an HTTP call, which has some overhead attached to it. So minimizing fetch calls specifically is usually good, but there's no technical reason you can't do a million of them here like this.
Is it basically like depending on the computer, how many asynchronous things can happen at once?
I mean, yeah, I've never seen the number exceeded. It's some ridiculous number, like 2 to the 32nd. Many, or maybe 64K. I don't know. But yeah, in a modern computer, it is very likely you'll run up against that limit in a normally functioning program. If you get it in an infinite loop or something, it might be like, hey, you added 40 billion fetches. I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I think that's right. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Awesome.
Oh, well.
Thank you. Cool. Other questions in this area? Cool. So let's see if that is right. I bet it is. Yeah, so fetch the return value after the fetch, and then we're coming back with our data, and look at that, there's our data. These are our card objects. Cool. So again, we're do stuff before the fetch, and the way that makes sense for me, and maybe it'll make sense for other people. The way I think about this is it's not doing, because we kind of think of like, oh, we're going to fetch and we're going to do this thing. And it's not doing this thing. It's like putting in a ticket for it. It's putting in an order for it. It's making this request of the computer. Please, when you get to time, make this call to this URL. And if it's not too much trouble, when it returns, do this stuff. But don't mind me. Continue doing what you were doing. And that's true for any asynchronous call. And you're going to see a few in the upcoming weeks. Yeah, so that's how asynchronous stuff works. There are also async and await keywords. So you'd have an async function, and then you'd say like await fetch, and then these would just be commands after it. I think that's really confusing for a lot of people. It makes the syntax a little bit cleaner, and makes it read as if it's not asynchronous, which obfuscates what it's actually doing. You'll see that in examples and stuff sometimes.
What would be the difference between await and then?
They're under the hood, they're exactly the same. They both create promises and resolve those promises. It would just look different. So it has to be, well, I think they just added, like literally last month, they changed this. But this will always work. So we have an asynchronous function, do stuff. And in here, we can say await fetch cards URL. And then I forget the exact syntax. It's like I think it returns the data from there, or it'll do the response. And then we can do await. Oh, this would have to be a constant. And then we would say await const JSON equals res.json. Yes, we have to await that as well. And then we do stuff with JSON here. So it kind of reads as if it's just doing those in order, and it's not. And then if you have other stuff down here, it's gonna wait for that stuff to return. It kind of wraps it in a weird thing. It reads more like someone who doesn't understand asynchronous stuff would think it should be written. But I think it really confuses the way that it actually works, which can lead to weird errors and thinking. It is used all over the place though, and a lot of people like it. And I applaud them for liking it. There's not really an advantage one way or the other besides what it looks like. They both operate exactly the same. So if you decide to try that out and it works for you, awesome. Do it that way. I like to think of it this way because my brain is old and has been doing it this way for a while. And we fear change. We don't. But yeah, either way is fine. But we teach it this way, and it's going to work this way and all the stuff that you see here. So learn this way first. And if you like async await later, use that. Totally fine.
Just to clarify though, it's like the difference between making a variable and just doing a function.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's plenty of resources I can point you to stuff if you want to try that out. I would recommend getting comfortable with this way first. And I think doing the straight promises way also gives you more flexibility. We're not going to see it in simple examples here, but you can generate a bunch of fetches and throw them in an array and then do them all at once, or you can save them in an object and then call them as you need them, or pass them around in functions. There's a lot of more advanced stuff you can do that feels more tricky to do in async await. But again, that's my opinion. So do what you like. Cool. Any questions before we go to this last bit? Got a little bit over the hour, but that's fine. Cool. So we've done our fetch. We've got our data back. And so now, we can also do, it looks like JSON or data. These are equivalent, right? We're getting the data and we're passing it to this function. This is just, it's a shorthand way of writing it, and also it feels more natural to me. It reads a little more like English, like, oh, we're going to do the thing, and then we're going to console log it. In this case, I think I'm going to write a function that's going to put it on the page. So, render cards. And it's going to take a list of cards. And so this is the function that's going to take the data and put it on the page. And so I'm just going to put that here. And again, this reads more Englishy. Fetch the cards, then render the cards. And since they're named what they do, even if you don't have access to this function, you have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen. So let's go ahead, and I already grabbed our card list here. And so this is in the global scope. I can use it in this function. If you want to move this into the function, that's fine. I'll often, when I run through some of the other labs, like Toy Tales or whatever, as I go along, you'll often see me moving them back and forth as I refactor, depending on where we are in the project. This is code, not woodworking or welding. It's way easier to change stuff around and play with it. So feel free to experiment as you go along. I'm sure you all do this already. Cool. And so the first thing I like to do in a function like this is just make sure I'm doing the right thing. Make sure I'm getting what I think I'm getting, make sure I'm calling the right function, and so on. So this should just log out the cards again. Hey, it does it. Great. And I can even, if I want to trace out where I am, so I know that, hey, I'm calling this function, and if I need to debug it, I know what's what. And generally, I will, as I verify that I've done things right, I'll remove console logs, just so it's not cluttered. It's easier to read. Cool. And in here, this is just where I'm going to throw the cards on the list. I'm just going to throw the card names on for now. And I can look at our data here, card_name. So here is where I'm going to. I'm going to go through all the cards. So I'm going to for each through them. I could do a for loop. I could do a lot of things. For each works great. For each takes a function. So I'm going to say for each card, I'm going to do some stuff. You may be tempted to, and I have seen, maybe not senior, but intermediate programs do like a map here instead. That will work, but that's not what map is for. Map is for changing an array into another array of the same size. It'll do the thing, but it's less clear what's happening. So if you're just looping through an array and doing stuff with them, do it for each. I'm happy to talk about higher order functions like that at length in the future. So basically, I'm going to be taking each card. For each card, I'm going to be, I'm just going to create a new element. Document create element. Create element. It's going to be a list item. And I'm going to assign it to a variable. I'm going to call it card ally, card item. How about that? I tend to use const for everything until I'm sure that I need to change that value, just to make things cleaner. That's just a habit I built that has served me well. If you want, you can do let there; it'll work just fine. But if you're not changing the value of something, make it a constant so you don't change stuff by accident. Cool. I've created that element. I'm going to. It doesn't matter what order you do these parts. I'm going to attach it first. I know I'll add the text first. So I'll say card item. What are some ways I can fill out the text in this element?
Text content.
You do
Just
text content.
Or inner text.
Yeah.
Or inner HTML.
Yep. All three of those will definitely work. I like text content for now. I change my mind all the time. Text content works great for text content. So card has the card underscore name. I'm just going to say card underscore name. Sweet. And I'm going to attach the item to our card list or card list. Oh, that's confusing. Card list. I'd probably change this. In fact, I'm going to card UL element. That's not as easy to read, but it says what it is more, because like, in my brain, I could be talking about this card list, right? Or card element list, or anything that's descriptive. I'm just going to call it this for now. Append. So I can do append, I can do append child. They both do almost identically the same thing. There's a very slight difference. I tend to use append just because it's a little bit more flexible and because it's less things to type. So I'm just going to append that card item. And again, I can call it like, if I want to refactor this, you can select the word and do Command D or Control D on Windows. It'll select all of them, and I can just rename all these. So let's rename it to card list item element. Ooh. So you can rename it whatever makes sense to you.
What command is that? Or
So if you select something and do Command D on the Mac,
okay.
That'll select it, and then you can edit. It's a multi-cursor mode there. Or you can do a find and replace or whatever. As long as it's and sometimes names are too long, which makes them harder to read. So this is the rule 2 part. Make it work good for you so you can easily understand it. Format a little bit. Great. And
So you say Command D, right?
yeah, it's Command D on Mac. I think it's Control D on Windows, but don't quote me on that because I haven't used Windows in mumble years. Cool. And I think that's gonna do it. Let's see. Hey, it did it. Great. Boom, boom, boom. There's our cards. Questions about this? I'm going to show you one more little thing, and then we'll break. Anything you want to clear up about this, or anything you don't understand? Awesome. I'm just gonna make one more little function.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
or before the I mean the console log in render call, yeah, in
Mhm.
line 10. Is it I mean, can we put it somewhere else too, or that's the
Um,
only place?
Yeah, you could, it's just a JavaScript command. So you can put it wherever you want. It's just for me, it's easier to put um when I'm kind of exploring code that I'm not uh fully familiar with yet or unsure what I'm doing. I'll often put a console log at the top of each function. Um, because when I get an error somewhere, it's nice to know in which function it happened if it's not clear from the error message.
Oh,
But yeah,
okay.
you can put
So
console logs wherever you like.
okay, in doing that, we don't have to invoke the function anymore, right?
Which function?
Like the render function, the render call, the function render call, line, yeah. If we didn't have the line 10 there, then we have to invoke the function render call, right?
Well, we're
Or
still invoking the function render cards up here.
oh, okay,
Yeah, so
okay,
we're passing the render cards function to the promise that comes back from our fetch, that comes back
yeah.
from the render JSON. No, we're passing render cards to the promise that comes back from res JSON, which comes back from our cards URL. So render
Oh,
cards is the thing that we're doing with the data that comes back from the fetch.
okay.
Clear it up a little bit.
Is that why there's no need to do like an extra variable for instance, this invocation of render cards looks like it's passing in nothing to render cards, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
normally there'd be parentheses after it with something in there.
Yeah. Great question. And so this goes back to the functions are first class objects. A function is just an object, so we can pass it around. We can write it this way too.
Okay.
That's how I have it actually.
And then
Yeah.
that's the JSON that's being okay, that we're getting from the fetch.
Yeah. So
Okay.
again, dot then is a function that takes a function as an argument. This highlighted part, that's a function, right? And this function says take in JSON and then call this other function with that JSON.
Okay.
Which is fine, totally works if it makes more sense to you to do it this way. You can also do it this way where you're just passing the function itself. And so what's happening here is that it's passing in the data directly into this function. Does that make sense?
Can I run through the code just to make sure I understand what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're fetching some data from our local host. Where the data from the local host are the Tara.json data. So we're fetching that data and then we're putting a then request to collect the data from the server and transfer it to as a JSON data. And then once that happens, we're telling it to get that data and run it through the render card function. And when it renders through the function, we're telling the function to create a card for each data element, I guess it would be that we're getting from the tarat.json file. And then we're creating an li element, and we're creating text content with the card data of the card name, and then we're appending that card name to the actual we're appending it to the actual elements.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, awesome. Other questions about this stuff? Yeah, go for it.
So render cards is in the dot then is going to just take everything that happens to be in the I mean, I kind of get it, but it seems weird to me that the fetch cards URL and then the res arrow res.json. I don't know why, that just seems like kind of redundant, I guess.
Yeah.
But I guess it kind of makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, it is kind of an annoying extra step. And there are libraries you can add on like Axios that takes that step away.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I guess we talked about this yesterday.
Yeah.
But
It is way easier than it used to be. Let me tell you. Yeah, there's a whole XHR thing that you had to do, had event listeners up. It was a giant mess before. So even though it's an extra step here, and like I feel it, yeah, rotten kids don't know how good you have it. Yeah, does it make sense to you how fetch returns a promise, and this then is being called on the promise?
yeah, I think
Okay.
it does. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool.
It does too. I have a question. I mean, I I I understand the whole thing, except one thing, the
Mhm.
catch part.
Yeah.
Like I'm blanked about. I don't understand the catch part. Because if I was doing the right, I would do everything without a catch.
Yeah.
So
So
I don't know if it
the
works.
catch is to do something when there's an error. So whether we put in a wrong URL or something happened on the server, that's going to put the promise into the rejected state instead of the resolved state. In which case, it's not going to run any of these thens. It's going to run the catch. So kind of mechanically, how it works is, we put in the wrong URL here. It makes a fetch. These dot thens are just saying, because we're getting the promise object back. The promise is coming back. And these are just saying, hey, when you resolve, when you got a chance, run this for me. And then it's going to return the promise here. And this is going to return the promise here. This catch is, again, just saying like, hey, don't mean to bother you, but if you happen to have an error, please run this function for us. And you can chain a million of these if you want. There's also another one called .finally that says like whether it passed or failed, run this function. And those are the only three we're really going to be using.
Oh, this is like, are you advising us to do that in case if we have to do the fetch, to do the dot then, the two dot then, and then do the catch after?
Yeah, that's a general pattern you'll see. Error checking is extra typing and makes code harder to read, but it definitely helps when you do have an error and you don't know what's going on. You can leave it off. It'll work fine without it. And then later on, if you have an error, you can throw it on there. I like to have them there just as, as a backup in case something goes wrong.
Is it like, okay, this is probably, I don't know, but I'm just gonna ask anyway. Is it like the same way for any type of function that we have to do? And if you have to fetch something, it's like that's the only way to write catch, right? Like, something other thing.
Yeah. And this what you pass to the catch depends on what you care about the error, right? You can just log out the whole error. You can just log out a message that says, hey, something went wrong. You can send the error somewhere else, a lot of things. But it's just however you want to handle an error coming from that fetch, that's what you put in there.
Okay.
Does that answer what you were asking?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Awesome. What else do we have? Sweet. So this is basically it. I'm going to do one more little glow up here to make this easier for me to read. That's a function. You can pass functions in. It's great. It works. I'm going to make this a separate function. I'm going to call it render card because it's just going to render a single card. We're going to get syntax errors. Yeah, cool. So it's going to look like this. Take my arrow out. Bing, bam, boom. Cool. So same stuff. The only thing that's different is I'm going to pass this function into the for each. So this is refactoring. When you refactor, everything should work exactly the same. Does it?
Okay, so it's the same thing. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Cool. So refactoring, I think, is a very important skill to have. Refactoring, all it means is I I'm changing the way the code looks or the way it's organized, or maybe the process it uses to produce a result. But whenever I refactor, I always want to make sure that it is doing the same thing as it was before I started. In this case, let me take this out. In this case, all I'm doing is pulling it out into another function, so it's easier for me to read. So if I didn't see this, I can read this like, hey, function render cards, for each card, render the card. Boom. In English, almost, it tells me what I'm doing. And then down in here, I'm doing the mechanics of that. The cool part is, if I changed the way I did this, if I pulled the card URL down here or used inner text or append child or some other method, I don't care about it up here. As long as it does the same thing and it's called the same thing, how it's implemented doesn't matter to me. Someone else could write this function for me and say, hey, use render card in there. So especially, this is a trivial case or a very simple case. Definitely when you get into writing real things, even like the practice labs and stuff, it helps so much to break things into smaller parts. That's our, like, literally our whole job is breaking things into smaller parts and putting those parts together. And it might make more sense for you to do it the other way. This is what works for me. And I will often, like, as you saw, write it one way and then change it to another way to make it make more sense as I go along. As I add more functionality and stuff, something becomes unclear, pull it out into another function, make it more clear. But yeah, that works exactly the same. If you don't like doing it this way, you don't have to. It's just an option. And I think that's where I'll end it. It's an hour and a half. That's a long time. Final questions before we wrap up.
When I do that refactoring,
Mm-hmm.
for some reason, everything breaks.
What is it doing?
So it's saying that card. I think I found it. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Single letter again. It's a single letter character bracket brace or comma. That's
yeah, and the one
90% of the
advantage this is when stuff breaks, where.
Still broken actually, but differently now. I'll fix it.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Other final questions?
Yeah, this is off topic, probably. I don't know, but are we, for the code challenge, right? For the coding challenge, are we going to have to, like the way you just did, like start everything from the scratch, the whole website? Are we going to have something like that to do, or it's gonna be some information already?
Yeah, there will definitely be a lot built out for you. Most of them have like most of a page built out, and maybe some framework there, but it'll say like, given all this stuff, add these functions.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and next week, maybe even Monday, I want to run through some sample challenges just so you have an idea of what they look like. Kind of remove some of that anxiety and get some more practice running through them.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to stop the screen share so we can see each other. Oh, hey, there's all my chat. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for hanging out. Anything else before we go? I'm going to record this and post it up so you'll have it for reference. Badass. Cool. Enjoy your short break before lecture, and I'll see y'all in a little bit. Catch you later. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you.